Hi, everybody. It's great to see you here again this week. Today, we are going to have a wonderful presentation from three of the artists in SAQA's exhibition, StitchPunk. But before we get started, I wanted to offer you the opportunity to be featured on Textile Talks in 2025. We have a form online, and if you have a great idea for a textile talk, please go ahead to www.saqa.com/calls and look for the one about textile talks. We're always looking for new ideas, new content, new presentations, and we'd love to hear from you. So I'm Martha Seelman. I'm the executive director of Studio Art Quilt Associates. We are a membership organization of about 4,300 people around the world who either make or collect or otherwise work with art quilts. And we just love sharing what we do with all of you. So at the very beginning, if you tuned in early, you got to see a slideshow of art that's in one of our 20 traveling exhibitions. This one is called StitchPunk. And when I first heard about StitchPunk, I thought, what is that? But then I realized that it's related to steampunk, which I had heard of from reading books and magazines. And steampunk has to do with taking Victorian England, usually, and imagining what would have happened if steam engines continued to be the way that things are done. So stitchpunk is looking at how stitch can similarly be fun and witty and do all sorts of interesting things in art. So we will be showing that full slideshow at the end of today's program. So if you didn't see it, don't worry, you're going to have another opportunity. But before then, you're going to get to have a deep dive into the artwork of three of the participating artists, Shannon Conley, Kate Crossley, and Lauryl Rose. And you'll get to hear about the inspiration for their work and what really gets them going as they're being inventive and creators. So we're going to start with Shannon Conley, who's going to be telling you about her work. Shannon is an art quilter from Moore, Oklahoma. She is also a professor of cell biology, and that's her day job, but her art is guided by an experimental approach and a willingness to try weird things, even if they don't work out. She is on SAQA's board. She's currently our treasurer, and we are thrilled to have her and to be able to showcase her amazing art. So Shannon, go ahead.
Thank you. Let me share my slides. Here we go. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here and present as part of this textile talk today. I love textile talks and I love the stitch punk theme. I was so excited when I saw that come out. There are so many creative ways to go with this theme, and I think you'll see that from a lot of our presenters today. And I'm going to share a little bit about my approach to that and where I went with the stitch punk theme. So this is my piece from the show. It's called It's Always Sunny in the Future. And when I started off, I was really working in a phase at the time I made this piece where I was trying to reuse materials a little bit more, trying to be a little bit more sustainable, thinking a lot about environmental collapse and climate change. And so this was part of a series of quilts I did, reusing lots of plastic waste and other things that might have been thrown away. And so before I start telling you about this piece in particular, I want to share a little bit about those other pieces. So the first one that I did in this sort of grouping, it's not really a thematic series, but it was mostly about, I have all of this junk, this stuff that would be thrown away. How can I avoid throwing it away? And this piece, Glycocalyx, was one of the first where I was really embracing this. As Martha said, I'm a cell biology professor. I run a research lab. And I don't know how many of you have ever been in a research lab, but there's lots of plastic waste associated with that. One of the things that I discovered in a cupboard when we were moving lab spaces was hundreds and hundreds of these 1 milliliter serological pipettes. You can see down there on the bottom left. We don't use them in the lab. They were brand new. I could not bear to throw them away. And so I thought, well, I will use them in a project. So I took them home and I covered them with fabric. And that was sort of the jumping off point for this quilt, Glycocalyx, that you see here. This is inspired by the lining of our blood vessels, which helps protect us from things that are in our blood. Here's some other pieces of that in progress. Really, I started from the spikes and the piece grew out from there. A lot of times people ask me how my 3D quilts stay 3D. So I just like to show in this case, the whole quilt is mounted onto sono tube, which is sturdy cardboard tubing that they use for casting concrete pylons. But I was really pleased with this ability to use up some materials that otherwise would have been thrown away. And so the next piece I did that was part of this exploration was this piece here. You see that's called the Armadillo and the Cow. That originated out of a really horrifyingly embarrassing story in which, even as an adult person, prior to moving to Oklahoma, I was convinced that armadillos were as big as cows. For anyone who doesn't live in a place where there are armadillos are small, maybe like about the size of a house cat. So they're nowhere near as big as cows, and my family has never let me live this down. But I was really excited to sort of continue with this idea of using up stuff that otherwise would have been thrown away. And so you can see in this piece, it used lots more stuff I brought home from the lab that we weren't using, rubber stoppers that went with flasks that we don't even own anymore, which I spray painted. The background of this quilt is all photographs, electron micrographs, and light micrographs from back in the day before we had digital cameras attached to our microscopes, and we had to print out all of our microscopy, and I stitched them down into the back. But the real sort of new thing I incorporated here was this idea of using plastics out of my recycling. And so, I mean, I don't know about how you guys life is, but our grocery stores here where I live are filled with single-use plastics. I hate that, and try to avoid it when I can, but a lot of things you just can't get without that. So I thought, well, what if I try to cut up some of this plastic, get it out of my recycling bin and use it for something else? So for the armadillo, I started cutting up all the plastics that were in my recycling bin and made them into scales and spray painted them in these really fun colors. And the first thing I realized was that I had a really hard time getting that spray paint to stick to the plastic, even with primer. And so the scales that were made out of milk jug plastic, which is not fully transparent, had a hard time. I was having a hard time getting the paint to stick, and it was chipping off, and it was really awful. And so I quickly sort of shifted gears to using more of the clear plastic like you would find in juice bottles or tomato containers, so that I could spray paint the back. And that's what you're seeing up here on the top, is where I've painted the back of the little scales. They're then stitched down onto the armadillo and used to sort of make that fun colored sculpture. Here's some more up close pictures of the armadillo. He's dimensional there. I really appreciate that he's giving the side eye to the cow, who is apparently not his very best friend. So when I started to think about the StitchPunk call, I started to just think sort of broadly. I really enjoy steampunk as an art form. I first encountered it in the context of cosplay, where there were all of these wonderful costumes of sort of traditional characters that were jazzed up or reimagined as steampunk characters with this wonderful Victorian aesthetic. One of my favorite books is by Terry Pratchett, called Going Postal. Terry Pratchett is normally somebody you would consider to be a fantasy author, but a lot of his work sort of crosses over into steampunk. And so I really was excited by this idea of the merging of technology with art. But I don't really find myself personally drawn to the gears and the Victorianness. And so I started to read about all of the other punk genres, and they're sort of broadly defined as being artistic genres where some specific era of technology is stretched out in time to be more widely applicable. And a lot of them are really dark. Cyberpunk is one of the most dominant, lots of post-apocalyptic futures, lots of, you know, nuclear wars and robot overlords and really dark stuff. And I was like, oh, this is just not very inspiring. And so the more I explored, I got really excited when I found some more positive punk subgenres. And one of them was solar punk. So not all of the technology-filled futures have to be dystopian. And so in my sort of optimistic solar punk future, I envision using solar technology to generate clean power, to conquer pollution, to save the planet. I'm a child of the 80s, and we were watching Captain Planet on TV. We had pollution solution board games, and I love this idea of all of us working together to save the planet by using technology to help us rather than using technology to destroy our world. So this piece was inspired by that idea. This is a piece where I envision us all with a very technologically advanced future, living amongst the trees, preserving biodiversity, having clean energy fueled little, individual spaceships and sort of Jetson style things, except in a giant rainforest. And that was where I went with this call. So, I forgot to introduce my first, in the pre-session with Martha, I said I was going to introduce my studio helpers. I have two studio helpers. This is Blue, and the one on the first screen was Spooky. They're always trying to help, sometimes including standing on the foot pedal of my sewing machine, which is not very helpful. So again, I went with recycled materials that I dug out of my recycled bin. One of the things that I found the most fun using these materials is that because of the way the plastics are cast or extruded, they often have shapes already built in. And so as I cut up the plastic, sort of shapes naturally emerged. So these purple bits that I had used to make the base of each little individual spaceship or swing, those are like the grippy handles on your juice jugs. And so it was a spur to creativity to have these sort of special shapes that just came out of how the plastic naturally cut up. Again, painted in the bright neon colors. I never met a neon rainbow I didn't want to wear or use in an art piece. Again, I'm a child of the 80s, and so I love those super bright colors. Here you can see them stitched down. I use a lot of painted backgrounds, and I like to use a lot of Shiba paint sticks. I really like the way that they can blend, and I especially like the way they add softness to the background here, while the reused plastic pieces have, sort of crisp, hard geometric shapes. Here are a few more close-ups of this piece. Again, all the shapes that just sort of came naturally out of the cut up things from my recycle bin. So I will just leave you with that. I want to leave you with a positive outlook for the future. We can do it. We can save the planet. We can save humanity, and we can do it together. Thank you.
Thanks, Shannon. If you ever encounter Shannon at any event, she will be either covered in dinosaurs or neon rainbows. She's just an amazing, upbeat, optimistic person, and her art certainly reflects that. Next, we're going to hear from Kate Crossley. Kate Crossley grew up in a home where everybody made things all the time, and she started making things herself. Her work is full of storytelling. Some of the stories are obvious, some of them are more personal to her, and she's going to share with you, among other things, views of her studio. I want to live in her studio because she collects everything, and it's just the most wonderful, inspirational environment. So Kate, tell us about your work.
Hi Martha, and hello everybody, and thanks for that lovely introduction. I need to share my screen. So where are we? Yeah, I think that's, yes. Can you see that okay? Right, well, I thought to start off with, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about me and what inspires my work. I've always been a sewer. I had my first machine aged 8. So I don't really remember learning how to sew, but what I really remember is that everybody in my family were always making things. My mum taught textiles and fashion design. My grandma was a tailor. My dad made boats and radios in his spare time. So there was always something being made, and I was encouraged and enabled to create. And alongside that creating, I also collected things. There we go. This is part of my studio. I collect things. I collect all sorts of things: stones, books, fabric, beads, old, new. It really doesn't matter to me. It's the story that when I handle something, I think about the story, and I like old things because I think they've had a past and they have a story for me. And I like my collection all around me. It's out of sight suddenly gets very much out of mind for me, and something can sit on a shelf for, this is the other side of the studio, and things can sit on a shelf for years, and then all of a sudden they come into focus and become a catalyst for new work. And I'm also inspired by phrases that I hear or read, or half-remembered stories, and this sort of sits together with my collection and becomes the catalyst and the starting point for work. I don't often work in a sketchbook. When I do, I have a total fear of the white blank page. So I work on brown paper because I find that gives me an access to the page. But I make very few sketches, but I'll show you what I mean here. I've just put on the side here is the minimal sketches that I made after thinking about this piece, which was called Here Be Dragons. And I was thinking about maps and treasure and my treasure that I keep and and I was thinking of ways of display. And I made this very basic sketch, and then I actually just start making. I don't elaborate too much on paper. I actually just start making, and that is my sketchbook. And this was made during COVID, and the mask sort of crept in because I thought that was a dragon that needed slaying. So basically, my jam jars are my sketchbook. And this is the first art quilt I made in 2010. It's called Storytelling. And it was the first time I actually started sewing objects onto quilts or garments. And it's not as crowded as a lot of my later work, but it's the first one that I did. It's inspired by half-remembered stories from my childhood. And you can see I've written those down, and they're quite fragmented. And then I've included objects from my family, as my dad's fishing flies, loads of buttons from the family button box that I remember growing up playing with, that I've still got, I've added to, and lots of photographs of family and family stories. And then this sudden use of collecting objects led to thinking about ways of displaying things and how we show off our things. And I like my things all around me. And I got very into the 16th and 17th century European concept of the cabinet of curiosity, or the Wunderkammer, as it was called on the continent. And it was a way in which the enlightened people of the time showed off their precious objects, and some of them were weird. I mean, they'd had stuffed mermaids and things like that in their collection, but they were absolutely obsessed with displaying these objects. So I made myself one, and this was just over 6 foot tall, and it's a paper mache cabinet, and it's got drawers and alcoves and all sorts of areas for me to show off my work. I alter things that I put into it. Very rarely do I put anything straight in there. It's usually got something tied on it or stitched on it, or bows or something. It goes through some change. Like these book pages, for instance, they were old book pages destined for landfill, and I tear them up and paint them and print them, and they go into test tubes or bottles, and they sit alongside free machine embroidery pieces, bits of wire, and all sorts of things. And I also make things to fill gaps if I can't find things to go in there. This is Brock. This went to Festival of Quilts in 2014, which is when it was made. And I was very lucky, it won the quilt creation category that year, which I was delighted about. It's not, as I heard one lady telling somebody, a giant grandfather clock covered in fabric. It's actually, it is a paper mache box again that I made. It's full of what my family lovingly refer to as my stuff. The face of it is, there was a lot of photo transfer in this piece as well, which I've got quite into. And I like the feeling of decay. I was thinking about mortality and how things decay and why I like old decaying things. And I think it's this sense of history that they have and the stories that they have to tell. I loved making this, and I was really interested to hear Shannon mention, she mentioned Terry Pratchett, and he's going to get his second mention now. I was also at the time reading one of his Death series, and Death has an old bone clock, in a white bone clock in his hall, and I think a little bit of that rubbed off on this as well. And again, it's all full of my altered bits and pieces, and it has a ticking pendulum as well. And just going on to Hunter Gatherer Guardian then, and it's back to this garment as object more than its purpose. And I always felt this with quilts. If somebody makes a quilt, whether it's to go on a wall or on a bed, the time that goes into it, and if they gift it to you, it's a thing of love and a thing of comfort and security that you can wrap yourself in. And I like that, to put those ideas onto the outside of the fabric. And with this jacket, I was thinking about our favourite armaments, coat armaments that we put on if we're going out into any sort of situation, that we put our best coat on and it's like our armour. So I thought, what would happen if I started actually putting those ideas onto the outside of the jacket? And I started off making the chainmail piece on the side, and then I started adding text and thickening it up with quilting to be a protective surface, and to become a protective surface for me, and adding lots of text. And again, I really enjoyed making this piece. It was, and I kept coming across this phrase about ancestors and how many ancestors we get, or we have. And I mean, we've all got the same amount of ancestors, but I was amazed when I found out that I've got 1 billion ancestors in 30 generations, which is about 1,000 years. And I just thought that starts making the world so wonderfully small and cozy rather than a big scary place. And I like those ideas with that. I wanted to include a couple of slides from past SAQA benefit auction pieces that I've made, partly because I absolutely adore making them. I think it's a fantastic thing to be involved with. And I love the way I can explore, because they're only 12 inches square, and you can explore so many things making these. I can get ideas that I haven't been able to put into bigger pieces of work. I can explore those in a small space. And it also makes me discipline myself, because I can't just put everything into such a small space. So I have to make my choices much more carefully, and I enjoy that sort of discipline. This is the piece I made last year when I was making the steampunk piece for the steampunk exhibition, and it allows me also to work with new materials. And this one went down quite well, so I still haven't quite let go of it yet. So this is the piece that I've made for the SAQA benefit auction this year, which I believe just arrived. Thank goodness. And then This is Minerva, my StitchPunk warrior. She's just over life, well, she is life size, and I had an absolute ball making. She's wearing an actual old corset, which I deconstructed somewhat. And again, I found myself wanting to put the outside or the inside workings of the corset onto the outside of the fabric. And so I took the stays out because I had to alter it slightly. And then I found there were these wonderful spiral creations. So I riveted them back onto the outside. And she has armor, and she has all of the accoutrements that my mother and my grandmother had. And she's ready for anything. She really is. And I love the idea that this warrior could be out there. And she sprang into my mind almost fully formed when I heard the call for entry to the StitchPunk exhibition. And she's my imagining of what might be in a futuristic steampunk world where goddesses have been pressed into service for us. So this is her, and the inspiration for her, I was still thinking about the people who've gone before me and paved the way for me, especially my mother and my grandmother. And they were both always ready with a needle for any sort of last minute dress emergency or trouser turn-ups, or even repairing a horse rug on the kitchen table on Christmas Day. Nothing ever fazed them. And I hope that in some small way, I am as unfazed by my sewing and into the future, and I can live up to that warrior spirit. So I'll leave you there with that and take any questions. Thank you, Martha.
Oh, thank you, Kate. Right now, StitchPunk is on exhibit at the New England Quilt Museum in Lowell, Massachusetts, but it will be traveling to Birmingham, England, to the Festival of Quilts in August, and Kate will be there as one of our volunteers. So be sure to stop by, see steampunk in person, and get to meet Kate. Our third artist today is Lauryl Rose, a mom and textile artist from Roseville, California. She has a master's degree in literature from Mills College in Oakland and has worked in alternative public education for 25 years. For the last 2 years, she has run a free in-person meetup for anyone interested in learning to hand sew. And her piece in StitchPunk is got to be one of the most out there ideas of any of the pieces that we've included. And so I can't wait for you to find out what her inspiration was and how she made the piece. So take it away, Laurel.
Thank you so much. Folks, I'm having some trouble with my internet, so I'm going to need to turn off my video while I present. I apologize. Okay, thank you for having me. My name is Lauryl Rose, although aspirationally, I hope someday to be Great Grandma Rosie. And I'm here to talk for a few minutes about the conception of the hoverboard cozy. My hope is that it provides you with some additional appreciation for the idiosyncrasies in your own creative endeavors. It began with scrolling Pinterest in a 3 a.m. perimenopausal stupor. There were two images in particular that captured my imagination. Firstly, this colorful embroidery work. It seemed very soothing, almost like some type of paint by numbers for hand sewing. I wanted to learn how to embroider and bead on fabric, so I bought some cheap seed beads and I broke out my scraps. This was the outcome of my messing around. I eventually used what I learned in this little piece to do the simple backstitch, beading, and whip stitch applique on the hoverboard cozy. This brings us to image number 2. Shortly after starting the little flower piece, I saw Lena Salmi on Pinterest and I was just absolutely smitten. She is an unapologetically vibrant, joyous, purposeful, and passionate woman in a world that so often tells middle-aged women that they're done being relevant, no longer powerful or sexy, no longer of interest. But Lena Salmi defies so many sexist, ageist norms. I couldn't stop thinking about her, especially this quote that I will read now. She said, "I began skateboarding at the age of 61. I had been longboarding before that since the age of 57. When you begin as old as me, you have the freedom to make as many mistakes as possible." Another reason I got into skating was that I used to bike to the Olympic swimming stadium in Helsinki, but I had tuned a beautiful bike and thought that it would be okay. It was stolen outside the swimming stadium. So I quite suddenly got in my mind, okay, let's buy a longboard. That way I can ride it to the sports place and it will fit into the lockers. And so I found my newest and most loved sports nowadays. Close quote. So I immediately saw a path forward that I hadn't known that I needed. I was inspired to take a chance myself. I was in my late 40s when I bought a cheap skateboard at Target and I started crashing my way through the local park. As a side note, I'd like to mention that I took the wheels off that first skateboard and used it as part of the stand the cozy is currently on. And like Lena, I too experienced some misfortunes in the process of learning to skate. I quickly learned to keep my mouth closed when I was skating because I swallowed a fly. Later that same night, I came home and dropped the longboard next to my bed and climbed in to watch some bad television and sew. When I got tired, I threw my sewing work on the floor because I'm a bit of a slob, and when the fabric landed on the skateboard, I thought to myself, I'll turn it into a cover, a skateboard cozy, if you will. Everyone I told that thought to told me it was a really stupid idea. And I've learned that the ideas you have that other people think are stupid are likely some of your best ideas getting kicked around by unimaginative and intransigent minds. In all reality, nothing new ever happens without the oddballs and weirdos messing around and making bizarre stuff out of their peculiar ideas and interpretations of life. So I encourage the embracing of your bad ideas and urge you not to be discouraged out of building something new because some jerk was a jerk to you. I started crafting the skateboard cozy in a little bit of defiance to the aforementioned jerks. As I explored skateboarding culture, that little defiant streak got wider. I thought the iconic Santa Cruz screaming hand needed a little glow up. It was so grotesquely masculine. So in my mind, I added lipstick and nail polish and a tongue piercing. That delighted me, so I decided I'd embed it on my skateboard cozy. And suddenly the project moved way past nice little beaded flowers and into something more thoughtful, more cohesive. It had more significant things to say about a life lived in resistance of who middle-aged women were told to be and what it meant to create new visual narratives from vintage and male-dominated iconography. The cozy evolved into a wider expression of thoughtful passing years, of aging that maintained a type of exuberance and curiosity. The imagery on the piece took shape to reflect the development of a textile artist, and the cozy morphed quickly into a representation of journey, going from top to bottom of a well-lived life. I'll break some of that imagery down here. This is a close-up of the upper third of the cozy. We will start at the end, post-life, if you will. The 3 stars at the top are a nod to the divinity of the maiden, mother, and crone, the sacred 3. The passions and expressions of life and love are the height or the crown of our lives and elevate us into our personal heavens, represented by the area above the clouds. The space here is dark as it ends in the same quiet, peaceful, and mysterious darkness where it begins. Here is the centerpiece or the development of a life as a creative woman. The pom-poms I hate, but are a nod to the traditional cozy. The screaming hand is holding a needle, as we so often do literally and metaphorically, to stitch together seemingly disparate pieces of life to make sense or to make something practical or personally meaningful. The hand dominates the imagery of the piece and is meant to take up space, as women should be doing. The dialogue bubble is cut off in this picture, but it speaks out unashamedly about passions as represented by the beloved sewing machine. The hand is encircled by the female symbol, meant to accentuate the creative feminine taking action and expressing itself. Refashioning narratives to fit the dynamic experiences of womanhood. Lastly, the bottom third of the cozy. The thread spool is another representation of the feminine. Think of the sister fates of Greek mythology cutting the gold threads to end a life. But of course, thread gives us a way to ground pieces together and soar in our expressions as an integral tool of our work and growth. The entire piece has a radial gradient around this vertical narrative, dark at the edge and lighter in the middle. It acknowledges the cyclical nature of life while drawing attention to the centerpiece. It again comments on how we end in peaceful darkness, similar to where we begin. There's also some dreamlike mushrooms here, breaking down the soil, recycling the past to allow the deaths that break our hearts to bring in new life. It speaks to how our past misfortunes are seed-like, sprouting new understandings in life. As mushrooms break down organic matter in the process of decay, they create the nutrients that nourish our futures, just as our past experiences can serve as inspiration for future art. When I saw the call for artists to the StitchPunk show, I rebranded my skateboard cozy to be a hoverboard cozy, so it spoke to the futuristic vision of the show. So, about rebranding. I'd like to recognize the pivot from things that seem to be misfits or failures, because I maintain that this is the essence of historical punk, and it remains true today. Rebranding or reapproaching an idea with creativity and exuberance can turn a thing from irrelevance or failure into something remarkable, like how sweethearts took their messed up, misprinted candies and made a joke of them for messed up lovers, not in relationships, but situationships, as messy and obscure as the erroneous candies. Also, how Lena Salme pivoted when her bicycle was stolen and redefined what skateboarding can be for older women. That kind of imaginative irreverence and boldness is integral to punk. And I'd like to add that the Sweetheart candies were a smash hit and completely sold out. Some parting thoughts. Each of our lives takes its course for better or for worse, and it serves us and others to attune to the possibilities offered at all ages and stages. Greeting what we encounter, whatever we may suffer, and remaining committed to receiving what it has to teach us, what it has to give us, is this magical confluence where we're able to find something extraordinary. Creativity and wisdom bloom in the mundane and allow us to conceive of and manifest weird and wonderful things, of punk things, through a flabby, crabby night of hot flashes scrolling Pinterest to this moment that I'm so privileged to share with you. Thank you so much. That's my magnum opus and myself and my contact information if anybody has questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laurel. That is one of my favorite How It Came to Be stories, with all of its twists and turns. And so if Shannon and Laurel and Kate could turn your videos back on, I have some questions from our audience. And Laurel, since right now we can see and hear you, let's start with you in case your internet continues to act up. Somebody wanted to know, so is a hoverboard cozy a practical item or is it simply decorative?
It's decorative. I understand that they are developing hoverboards, but my cozy certainly wouldn't fit over it. But as I was preparing these slides, I ran past an image of the hoverboard from the movie Back to the Future, which looks almost exactly the same. It's just a skateboard with like kind of no bottom. And it helps me develop the ideas. So
Mhm.
yeah, thank
And
you for
if
your
we,
question.
yeah, if we have hoverboards, we will definitely need cozies for
We
them.
will.
Kate, people wanted to know, how often do you replenish the supplies in your studio, and where
Oh.
do you find them?
Oh, I don't know if you heard my husband just shout every day then. It's constant. I think I've been doing it for so long. I mean, I can remember when I was 9, I spent some time in Egypt with my mum. She was teaching, and we went to a belly dancing show, and I used to go along specifically to pick up the dropped belly dancing discs that were all over the stage. And of course, at 9, you get away with it, and now it's become my normal. So it's constant. I look everywhere, charity shops, skips, anywhere, and people give me things. People give me their rubbish. It's pretty constant. It's pretty
Mhm.
constant.
And Shannon, are people giving you their plastic rubbish as well?
So sort of, right? Nobody's giving me their plastics out of their recycle bin because I have to just say, no, thank you. I have enough of my own. But I have had other labs like bring stuff down and be like, hey, we're getting rid of this. Do you want this stuff? It's hard, right? As people who collect, because I mean, how much stuff do we really want in our studios? But also, you know, we got to have the cool stuff to make the cool art.
There was also 2 practical questions for you, Shannon, because you're working with plastics, which most of us are not familiar with. What kind of spray paint and what kind of glue?
So, okay, so I don't glue the plastics at all. I stitch them. I mean, you probably could glue them. And if I was going to glue them, I would use E6000 because I use E6000 for everything. I feel like it's a great glue. But the way they're attached, I sort of like use my hole punch to hole punch a little hole in each end, and then I stitch it down like you would a bead or something. The spray paint, I have been using cheap spray paint from the big box hardware store, which is, of course, not very sustainable. And I think I have tried that. I have tried the primers that are just available at the local big box store. And this is where you run into problems with the chipping. So if you're going to use that regular old generic spray paint, you need to be painting the back of the pieces. Otherwise, in my experience, it will chip no matter what kind of primer you use. But I feel like there are all kinds of plastic and polymer things in the world that have airbrushed paint on them that shouldn't chip off. So I have a little airbrush set up. I haven't tried that yet. So I know there are better paints out there is what I'm saying. I just don't really know what they are.
Okay. I know Judith Content uses automobile touch-up paint, and that
Right.
she finds adheres to all sorts of things, but
yes,
they all have bad fumes, so that
they
there's
do.
a balance. Kate, how do you attach all of your things?
It tends to be in whatever way it will work. I'm not overly precious about, I will use glue, I will use a safety pin, I will use what's necessary. I do try and stitch most things down, but I've found that when things are traveling, they are a little better with a little bit of all-purpose clear glue behind them. I did have one, I sent a small box to somebody and I hadn't glued the corks in the bottles, and it obviously got twizzled in transit, and there was piles of beads in the bottom of the box when it arrived. So, which was fun to put right. So now I do use a dab of glue. So, but it's whatever means necessary. But I use a hole punch. I'm a bit like Shannon. I'll use a hole punch and make a hole or something like that.
And Laurel, you use a lot of different symbols in your cozy. are those just symbols that you use a lot in your work, or did you do a deep dive into imagery in order to find just the right symbols to include?
That's a great question. I'm not entirely sure. I think that there's some divinity in the creative process that leads you to seeing things and understanding things that go way past your own experiences and your own moment in being. And I don't know, things just started coalescing in my mind and coming out on the fabric. I don't think I can put my finger directly on what it was. But we all have that beautiful, mysterious fount of the creative in us that takes us in places that we might never have been able to get ourselves. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it is a somewhat mysterious process. Like Shannon, why an armadillo?
It's become my talisman animal ever since this horrible experience. I mean, it was embarrassing. I was in the middle of advanced graduate degrees in biology when I was so insistent that those armadillos were that big. And I argued. And my sister, who had gone to college in Texas, she was like, no, just no. So ever since then, I've adopted it. And they're really cool. And I could go on and on about why they're cool, but I don't want to use up more minutes than I have.
And maybe someday in that punk future, they really will be that large. You never know.
Okay, I do have to say, there were prehistoric armadillos that were that large. And I just saw a fossilized one at the Geology Museum in Madison, Wisconsin.
Well, there you go. It could happen again. You know. Kate, you use a lot of symbolism in your work as well. I know there's a lot of birds, there's a lot of words. What are the symbols that really draw you over and over again?
I think, oh God, you've asked the easy questions. Why don't you? I think they're very personal to me. They are something that resonates with me. Although I do go to a lot of the Norse mythology, and well, with Minerva, she's a Roman goddess, and she was a goddess of war and textiles and craft. Where's that from? How wonderful! And so all around me, really, and I've always read. My mum and my grandparents were Welsh, so I read the Mabinogion, which is the Welsh folk tales and the Welsh stories, and they're just so stuffed full of symbolism and fairies and all of that. So I was brought up on those stories, so it sort of feels like it's under my skin.
Yeah, and final question for Laurel. Does the reading that you do inform the art that you create?
It does. Yeah, absolutely. But no more than anything else, like having this conversation, listening to colleagues, scrolling Pinterest, standing at the bus station. I mean, inspiration is everywhere. You're open to the moment of receiving it.
Well, I can't better that. That's a great way to end this program. Thank you all for sharing with us today. Audience, we are going to show you the full exhibition of the steampunk artworks. Stay tuned, don't go away yet. And as I said, it is currently at the New England Quilt Museum in Lowell, Massachusetts. And in August, it will be at the Festival of Quilts in Birmingham, England. If you go to SAQA.com/StitchPunk, you can see all of the work. You can see where it's going to be traveling next. And you can also purchase a catalog. So again, that's SAQA.com/StitchPunk. And now sit back and enjoy the full exhibition. Thank you so much for being here.